I'm Randy Ruth, and welcome to another edition of Your Pocket Mechanic. This afternoon, I want to talk to you about something that I have been seeing a lot of on the web lately, and it concerns fluid flushes in automobiles. Customers are being sold on the idea that they need to flush their automatic transmission fluid, their power steering fluid, their engine coolant, outside of what the manufacturer recommends. A lot of new shops have these machines that they hook up to the transmission lines of your vehicle, for instance, and the machine will pump out your old transmission fluid while installing fresh new fluid. And shops are really pushing this for one reason or another. Let me give you a little bit of history first. Years ago, there was a lot of legitimate work that could be sold to car owners on their cars. In fact, it used to be at 30,000 miles. That was the big service. That was where shops sold a bill of goods on your vehicle that it actually needed, that the manufacturer recommended. We would replace spark plugs, the fuel filter, repack the wheel bearings, replace the transmission oil, the differential oil, and on and on. It was, to an extent, almost a complete refresh of all the fluids in the vehicle and the tune-up components. And this was a very expensive service for a lot of people and a very profitable job for the shops. But over the years, recently, manufacturers have begun building better cars and installing, for instance, iridium tip spark plugs. They're using fluids that last a lot longer. A lot of cars don't even have a fuel filter anymore. That's done inside the fuel tank. And so it's taken away from what shops used to be able to count on, as their bread and butter, so to speak. If you look at your owner's manual, which I always encourage people to read their owner's manual, become very familiar with it. And in the back, it'll list a service schedule for your vehicle. Some will list what's called a normal schedule, and some will list what's called a severe schedule, depending on where you live. It may shorten up the services on the severe schedule to less miles than on normal service. And no matter where you live, every shop's going to tell you you need to follow the severe schedule for one reason or another. I live out in the desert, for instance, where it gets really warm, really dusty, so it would make sense that a car owner would follow a severe schedule when it comes to maintaining their cars. But even a normal schedule would probably get me by just fine. My wife's new car doesn't even recommend a spark plug replacement till 100,000 miles. And at one time, in older vehicles, that used to be done at about 30,000 miles. The transmission oil and the differential oil are lifetime. It never needs to be done unless something happens and work needs to be done. Then, of course, you would add new fluid. With that, a lot of shops have begun finding creative ways to sell customers work. In the absence of that one-time dependable work, they are now pushing fluid flushes that fall outside the manufacturer's recommendation. And it's really a disservice to customers, because unless it specifically tells you in your owner's manual that you need to have a flush done in between services, there's no reason to have it done. Now, the mechanic may come out and show you a dipstick that they've pulled out of your vehicle, and the fluid looks dirty, and they're like, this looks really burned. Yeah, I've seen them do it with power steering fluid, and I've seen them do it with transmission oil. And, of course, you panic because you don't want to have to replace an expensive transmission. You may tell them to go ahead and do it because you don't know what new fluid looks like or smells like, and you're depending on them to tell you the truth. I'll be honest with you that after a while, fluid does look dirty. Power steering oil does smell after a while. Doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's used. It's no longer new. It doesn't mean it needs to be flushed. And they may push you a whole bunch of reasons to do it. They may tell you that, well, if you continue letting it go, your transmission's going to fail. Your power steering oil, if it goes, you may lose power steering assist. Don't fall for it, please. I can understand why they're pushing this work. They've lost what used to be legitimate work. And a lot of these fluid flush machines are sold by a company that has nothing to do with the shop itself. And the company who sells these machines go in and sell the shop a bill of goods. They present such a wonderful story saying, this is the best thing you can do for your customer. Your customers will love you. Your bottom line will love you. It looks like a win-win deal. It's a ripoff. It is a ripoff. I'm going to tell you straight up, don't buy it. If the manufacturer doesn't recommend it, it is not in your owner's manual, don't buy it. Don't panic when the mechanic shows you a dipstick and says, oh, your fluid looks used, you ought to go ahead and flush it. Don't buy it. You don't need it. There may be very limited instances where you may need a flush. If you own a, say for instance, a pickup, and you do a lot of towing, a lot of heavy towing, you may want to service your automatic transmission outside of what the normal schedule is. That doesn't mean you need to go and have it flushed every 10,000 miles. You need to be prudent. A lot of pickups that do towing are equipped with transmission coolers. They're set up to do it, so you may not even need a automatic transmission fluid flush in between the regular services. It depends on how well you know your vehicle. If you push it to the limits, yeah, you might want to get extra work done. But always go with what the manufacturer recommends. Get your owner's manual out, go to the maintenance section, and read how often something needs to be done, how often you need to replace the spark plugs, how often you need to change the air filter. And you can a lot of times pull your air filter out in between services yourself and look whether or not you need it. If you hold it up to the sunlight and you don't see any light coming through, yeah, you probably need one. You may be able to do that yourself, or the next time you have your oil changed, have it done. And don't fall for closer maintenance schedules either. A lot of shops are trying to push the idea that, well, I know it says to do your oil change every 7,500 or every 10,000. We recommend every 3,000. Well, of course they do. They're making money on it. That doesn't mean you need to have it done. Go by what your owner's manual tells you to do. The tragic part is I've also seen on some of these videos on YouTube where a customer is sold a flush, say an automatic transmission flush, and the shop doesn't even do it. They pull the car in, it's not a hidden camera. They bring the machine over there and never actually do the work. I don't want to get into that, okay? I do want to tell you those people ought to be prosecuted. They're thieves, they're not mechanics. They ought to go to jail, and they ought to serve as an example to other mechanics. There is no reason for it. That is outright thievery. It does nothing but builds distrust in this industry. You shouldn't want them in your shop if you're a mechanic. It's outright wrong. So don't fall for it. That's another good reason to stay away from flushes if your owner's manual doesn't tell you you need it. So that's my bottom line on flushes. Don't do it. You don't need it. I'm Randy Ruth, and have a good afternoon. Have a great weekend. Thank you for tuning in to Your Pocket Mechanic.